Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today, despite the rising number of COVID-19 cases. I know this is becoming very serious, so we really appreciate that all of you could make it today. So we are here to launch the Transparency in Corporate Reporting Assessment for the year 2021. My name is Nicole Elias. I am the Program Manager for the Private Sector Pillar at TI Sri Lanka. And without further ado, here we have the report. So this is the Transparency in Corporate Reporting Assessment for 2021. It's also available currently now on our website, and we'll get into the details now. So the research that was done for this report, through this we found that companies in Sri Lanka are considered moderately transparent. Now, what that means is that we've done a research of these companies' corporate reports. We've looked at how they are reporting, how transparent they are in their reporting. And we've looked at, we've allocated scores based on this study. And we've allocated that companies are moderately transparent from a score of 0 to 10, which means that 0 is least transparent in corporate reporting and 10 is fully transparent in corporate reporting. Now, companies on average in Sri Lanka, through the assessment that we did, they've scored 6.93. Now, that is considered moderately transparent. So what the companies that we assessed were the top 75 companies on the Colombo Stock Exchange, which was the top 75 we picked based on market capitalization. And the date we decided on was the 1st of June. As you know, the market capitalization of each company shifts on each day. So we picked the 1st of June 2021 and conducted the assessment from around July last year. And now this is the final report that we have with us. So what we're looking at is how transparent companies are in their corporate reporting. Now, this is not an assessment of, the integrity of a company, what goes on in the company, their normal practices on a day-to-day basis. But what we're looking at is how they're reporting. So what information they've put out into the public. Because what we find is that transparency is one way that you can fight corruption. So the first step that we've taken is looking at the reporting practices of these companies. And we're looking at the top 75 companies, while the private sector actually consists of several companies. And if you take Sri Lanka, for example, around 70% of the private sector is actually consisting of small and medium enterprises. So we've just taken a very small portion of that, which is the top 75 public limited companies. So this research that we did, the methodology that has been utilized was created by the Transparency International Secretariat, which is in Berlin. That's the national, TI Sri Lanka is the national chapter of Transparency International. So this study has been done around the world, looking at big corporations and also different countries where Transparency International has a chapter. These countries have also conducted these assessments. And in Sri Lanka, now this is the second time that we've done it. We did the first one, we launched the report in 2020. So through this assessment, we're ranking companies on only publicly available information. Now this is key because we are not looking at, we're not doing a direct investigation of companies, we are not trying to assess their secrets or anything like that of that nature. What we're looking at is how they have reported on these in publicly available information. So annual reports, for example, company websites, basically anything that's publicly available, either in a document, online, that kind of information. So the three areas that companies were assessed on were, I'll give you the areas and also give a brief about what each area consists of. So firstly, it's on reporting on anti-corruption programs. Now, an example for one of the questions that fall under this section would be if a company has a strong policy on how to combat corruption, so an anti-corruption policy, for example. So it's important that a company creates a policy of this nature that applies to all, not only all its employees, but also its board of directors, any agents that they have, suppliers, vendors, so all third parties that they contract with. So this is an example of one of the areas that are covered in this first section. The second section is transparency in transparency in company holdings. Now, or what we also call organizational transparency. So now each corporate, they have massive corporate structures. There's the parent company, they have several subsidiaries, sub-subsidiaries, joint ventures, associates, and so on. So what we've done here is, what we've looked at is if companies have disclosed how many subsidiaries they have, if they've given a list of their subsidiaries, if they've mentioned the countries of incorporation and operation of each of these subsidiaries. So those information is what is looked at in the second section. And finally, in our third section, we have disclosure of key financial information, where we're looking at domestic operations. So in Sri Lanka, we're looking at if companies have provided information on their revenue, capital expenditure, income tax, pre-income tax, and also importantly looking at if companies have reported on the community contributions they made, or what we commonly call CSR projects, corporate social responsibility projects. So looking at if they've reported transparently on those areas. So those are the three areas that the main assessment is conducted on. So there are around 26 questions in total, and those questions are added up and averaged, and we get the total score, and we rank companies, we score companies out of from 0 to 10. So like I mentioned earlier, this is the second year that we are conducting this assessment. And from what we've seen last year, now in 2020, sorry, not last year, the previous year, 2020, what we've seen is that there's been marginal improvement by companies. It's not a big improvement so far, but that could also be because this is just the second assessment. And in the first year, we assessed just 50 companies. So the small variance in the score could also be because the scope has increased. This year, we assessed 75 compared to last time's 50 companies. And last time, the overall score was 6.73 compared to this time's score of 6.93. But just keep in mind that this is because we've added about 26 new companies to this list. Now, I think one of the things people have been waiting to hear is who has done best, who has ranked at the top. So just looking at the scores that we have, we've decided to name in this conference the top 3 scoring companies. So in order of their scores, we have John Keells Holdings PLC, then we have the Commercial Bank of Ceylon, and we have Dialog Axiata. So those are the 3, and actually Commercial Bank and Dialog have ranked, both have ranked second in a tied score, because what we've done is if companies have received the same score, they have been ranked the same, but ordered in alphabetical order. So also interestingly, John Keells Holdings ranked first for the second consecutive year. And this time, they are the only company to obtain the full overall score of 10 for transparency in their disclosure practices. So like I mentioned earlier, companies were scored and ranked only on publicly available information. Now, the publicly available information that we looked at was company annual reports, the most recent annual report. So that's either their 2020 report or 2020, 2021, depending on each company's financial year. And also we looked at company websites. So because a lot of websites will have all the information you need anyway, so that was the other source that was looked at. And just to ensure that all this is captured in a very transparent way from our side, we have uploaded all this information on our website, tisrilanka.org. And we will be sharing, you can access the report online as well as the scores, and we have detailed score sheets of all the companies, how they've scored, what they've ranked, and kind of like a comparison also between companies, right? So also, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank all the companies who engaged with us in this assessment. So there were 75 companies, and there were quite a few who provided feedback to us, who engaged with us, who thanked us for doing this assessment and for recognizing the value that it has. And out of the 75, we had around 25 who actually properly engaged and provided feedback. So here's where it gets a little bit interesting. Now, this is assessing transparency in corporate reporting only. So it is very important to note that this assessment is not looking at companies, the implementation of how they work, their normal practices, the implementation of their programs and policies. It's just looking at if they've reported on it, if they've mentioned, we have this in place, we follow this, because it's kind of beyond the scope of this report to look at the assessment of the implementation of these companies. So from, like we mentioned, the scores go from 0 to 10, but a low score or a low rank, it does not necessarily mean that a company is bad or that they are engaged in any wrongdoing of any sort. It just means that from the 75 we've taken, they just happen to score on the lower end because they've released less information than the others. They might, one of the low scoring companies might be companies that have high levels of integrity, that maybe do not even have corruption in their offices. But so that's definitely beyond the scope of this report to look at, so we have not touched on that aspect of things. And just like the low score may not mean that they're bad, a high score does not also necessarily reflect operational success. So just to keep that in mind, because that is something that is very important through this assessment. So TISL feels that these scores that the companies obtain, we can use it as a catalyst for continuous improvement, because even though this, now for example, I named one company as being fully transparent according to this report, according to this assessment, but the methodology can always change, it can adapt, improve, so you can always, companies can always strive to do better in their work. And also we encourage companies to definitely to disclose more, to be more transparent, be more open, because you can become a socially responsible and very transparent organization if you disclose this information. We've also provided recommendations to companies on how they can improve their scoring. So what we are doing is not only looking at how companies can improve their scoring, but how they can actually improve their practices, if they can report better, if they can disclose more information. This results in getting a higher score. So what we encourage through the recommendations is that companies take these to heart, really look through the recommendations. We have provided detailed recommendations in our assessment, in the report, and they can turn this into implementational change. That's what we really hope. Interestingly, there are very few mandatory requirements for companies to disclose certain information. So the area I mentioned on domestic financial reporting, that section, companies are usually required, it's mandatory that they disclose information on their revenue, their capital expenditure, and the two other areas I mentioned. But all the other areas that we're assessing are voluntary. So this begs the question, why would companies disclose this information? So companies around the world, corporates around the world, are all following this best practice, because transparency is kind of like a sort of solution to corruption. It's not the only solution, but it's one of the solutions that we have. So if corporates are more transparent, it would result in less corruption, less opportunities for corruption. So basically, even though these requirements, certain requirements are not mandatory to disclose, we really hope that companies take the recommendations into heart and voluntarily disclose this, because we understand that there needs to be some legal change in the future. Regulations need to be introduced which really assess all these things. But at the moment, since the Sri Lankan laws do not support this, we hope that companies themselves take it to heart and make these changes internally. So I would like to just end by saying that what we intend to do with this assessment is to make it a conversation starter. It's meant to open doors to speak to the private sector about how they can do better, how they can be better, how they can disclose information in a better way. And that is what we're really trying to do. And hopefully the report would help companies to turn this reporting into actual implementation change. So that's what we really hope to achieve through the transparency in corporate reporting assessment. Thank you.
සුබ උදැසනක්. මම නදීශානි පෙරේරා, විධායක අධ්‍යක්ෂ Transparency International Sri Lanka ආයතනය. අද දින අපි 2021 වසරේ සමාගම් වාර්තාකරණය තුළ විනිවිදභාවය පිළිබඳ ඇගීම හෙවත් Transparency in Corporate Reporting වාර්තාව, අපි එහෙම නැත්නම් මේකට කෙටියෙන් කියනවා TRAC වාර්තාව එළි දක්වනවා 2021 වසරට. මේ අපි දෙවනි වසර Transparency International Sri Lanka ආයතනය මෙම ඇගයීම කරන. මෙම ඇගයීමට අනුව 2021 වසරේ අපිට ලැබෙන සොයා ගැනීම වන්නේ ඇගීමට ලක්වෙච්ච එම අපේ රටේ ආයතන විනිවිදභාවය වාර්තාකරණයේ විනිවිදභාවය සලකා බැලුවොත් මධ්‍යස්ථ මට්ටමකින් ලකුණු ගෙන තිබෙනවා කියන එක. වාර්තාකරණයේ විනිවිදභාවය සම්බන්ධයෙන් ඉහළමත් නෙමේ යම්කිසි මධ්‍යස්ථ මට්ටමක සිටිනවා කියන එක. ඉතින් ඇත්තටම Transparency in Corporate Reporting එහෙම නැත්නම් මේ සමාගම් වාර්තාකරණය තුල විනිවිදභාවයේ ඇගීම TRAC වාර්තාවෙන් කරන්නේ යම් අපේ රටේ සමාගම් ඔවුන්ගේ වාර්තාකරණයේ කොයිතාක් දුරට තොරතුරු හෙළිදරව් කරනවද, කොයිතාක් දුරට විනිවිදද යන්න කියන එක ඇගීමයි. මෙහිදී අප ආයතනය සලකා බැලුවේ වෙළඳපොළ පාග්ධනීකරණය අනුව 2021 ජූනි 1 වෙනිදා වන විට ප්‍රමුඛතම සිටින ආයතන 75 තමයි ඇගීමට ලක් කරේ ගිය වසරේදී. මේ අනුව මේ ඇගීමේදී මේ තොරතුරු අනාවරණයේදී තේමා 3ක් යටතේ අපි සලකා බලනවා මේ ලකුණු දීමේදී. එකක් තමයි මේ ආයතනයේ දූෂණ විරෝධී වැඩසටහන් සම්බන්ධයෙන් කොයිතාක් දුරට තොරතුරු හෙළිදරව් කරලා තියෙනවද කියන එක. අනික් පැත්තෙන් ආයතනයේ ව්‍යුහය සහ හිමිකාරීත්වය සම්බන්ධයෙන් කොයිතාක් දුරට තොරතුරු හෙළිදරව් කරනවද. තුන්වෙනියට ආයතනයේ මේ රට තුල කරන කාර්ය සම්බන්ධයෙන් සඳහා අදාළ මූල්‍යමය තොරතුරු කොයිතාක් දුරට හෙළිදරව් කරනවද කියන එක. ඒ අනුව ලබා දෙන ලකුණු මට්ටම සම්පූර්ණ ලකුණු හම්බෙන්නේ ලකුණු 10න්. එතකොට බිඳුව කියන්නේ අවම විනිවිදභාවයක් සහ 10 කියන්නේ උපරිම විනිවිදභාවයක් වෙනවා. ඒ අනුව මේ වසරේ මේ සමාගම් 75 ලකුණු ගත්තම සාමාන්‍ය අගයේ හැටියට එන්නේ 10න් 6.9ක්. මේ වසරේදී පළවෙනි ස්ථානයේ ලබාගෙන තියෙන ලකුණු මට්ටමින් ඇත්තටම 10න් 10ක්ම ලබා ගනිමින් ජෝන් කීල්ස් හෝල්ඩින්ග්ස් PLC සමාගම දෙවනි ස්ථානයේ ආයතන දෙකක් ඉන්නවා එකම ලකුණු මට්ටම ලබාගෙන. ඒ Commercial Bank of Ceylon PLC සහ Dialog Asiata PLC සමාගම ජෝන් කීල්ස් හෝල්ඩින්ග් සමාගම පළවෙනි ස්ථානයේ ලබා ගන්නේ දෙවෙනි වරටයි. අපි ටිකක් විග්‍රහ කළොත් මේ ලකුණු දීමෙන් අදහස් වන්නේ කුමක්ද සහ අදහස් නොවන්නේ කුමක්ද කියන එක. දැන් අදහස් නොවන්නේ එක දෙයක් තමයි මෙතනින් බලන්නේ මේ ආයතන අර මං කියපු කරුණු කාරණා සම්බන්ධයෙන් කොයිතාක් දුරට තොරතුරු හෙළිදරව් කරනවද කියන එක මිසක් ඒ දූෂණ විරෝධී වැඩසටහන් වල ක්‍රියාත්මක වීම කොයිතාක් දුරට ඵලදායීද කියන එක නෙමෙයි. ආයතනය තුල මෙහෙයුම් සම්බන්ධයෙන් වාර්තාවක් නෙමෙයි මේක. අපි මෙතනදී ඇයි එහෙමනම් දූෂණයට විරුද්ධව දූෂණ විරෝධී ආයතනයක් වන අපේ රටේ දූෂණයේ මැඩලීමට කරන සාමූහික ප්‍රයත්නයට දායක වීම තමයි Transparency Sri Lanka ආයතනයේ මේ මිෂන් එක. එතකොට අපි එහෙමනම් ඇයි මේ TRAC වාර්තාව කරන්නේ? ආයතනයක් පුද්ගලයෙක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් දූෂිත වෙනවා කියන එකට අනික් පැත්තට දූෂණය වෙනවා කියන එක අවම කරන්න ගන්න පුළුවන් ක්‍රියාමාර්ගයක් වන්නේ විනිවිදභාවය වැඩි කරන එක. විනිවිදභාවය වැඩි වෙන්න ජනතාවට ප්‍රශ්න කරන්න පුළුවන්. ජනතාවට පේනවා මෙතන කුමක්ද සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ කියලා. ඒ නිසා තමයි අපි මෙතනින් ට්‍රැක් වාර්තාවෙන් ඇගීමට ලක් කරන්නේ මේ රටේ ප්‍රධාන පෙළේ සිටින සමාගම් හැටියට මේ සමාගම් කොයිතාක් දුරට තම ක්‍රියාකාරකම් ගැන විනිවිද වෙනවද කියන එක. දැන් අපි හැමෝම දන්නවා පෞද්ගලික අංශය කියන්නේ අපේ රටේ සහ ඕනෑම රටක දූෂණයට රුකුලක් වෙන ආයතනයක්, රුකුලක් වෙන අංශයක්. ඒ දූෂණයට යම් කිසි විදිහකට දායාදයක් දෙනවා. සමහර වෙලාවට අපි බොහෝ චෝදනා එල්ල වෙනවා රාජ්‍ය අංශයත් එක්ක. රාජ්‍ය අංශයේ දූෂණයට පොළඹවනවා පෞද්ගලික අංශය කියලා. අනික් පැත්තෙන් චෝදනා එනවා දූෂිත පුද්ගලයන්ගේ මුදල් විශුද්ධීකරණය වගේ දේවල් වලට පෞද්ගලික අංශයෙන් උදව් ලැබෙනවා කියලා. මේ වගේ වාතාවරණයක් තියෙන මේ වගේ අවධියක අපි ට්‍රැක් වාර්තාව හරහා කරන්නේ මේ ආයතන උනන්දු කරවනවා පුළුවන් තරම් ඔබ නීතිමය රාමුවෙන් ඔබට ගොස් ඔබ හොඳ ආයතන පුරවැසියන් වශයෙන් ඔබේ තොරතුරු අනාවරණය කරන්න කියලා. ඒ නිසාම තමයි මොකද අපේ රටේ නීතියෙන් ඇත්තටම අනිවාර්ය කරලා තියෙන්නේ මේ සමාගම් හෙළිදරව් කරන්න ඕනේ මේ රට තුල කරන වැඩ සම්බන්ධ මූල්‍යමය තොරතුරු. එතනින් එහාට අපේ නීතියෙන් අනිවාර්ය කළේ නැහැ. නමුත් අපි ට්‍රැක් වාර්තාවේදී අපි ඇගයීමට ලක් කරනවා එතනින් ඔබට ගොස් ඔබ දූෂණ විරෝධී ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් ආයතනයේ තියනවාද? ඒක කුමක්ද? ඒක සම්බන්ධ තොරතුරු සහ ඉතාමත් වැදගත් දූෂණය වෙන තැනක් තමයි ආයතනයේ ව්‍යුහය සහ හිමිකාරීත්වය. මොනවද තියෙන ශාඛා ඒවයි අයිතිකරුවන් ඒ කවුද? තොරතුරු ඔබ දෙනවද ජනතාවට? ඉල්ලනකන් ඉන්නතු ප්‍රගාමීව අනාවරණය කරනවද කියන එක. ඉතින් එමගින් අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා මේ ආයතන සහ අනිත් ආයතනත් මේ දැකලා උනන්දු වෙයි කියලා තව තවත් තොරතුරු අනාවරණය කරන එක හොඳ පරිශ්‍රයක් බවට පත් කරගන්න. මේක සාමාන්‍යකරණය වෙයි කියන එක තමයි අපේ බලාපොරොත්තුව. ඒ වගේම ඒ නිසාම තමයි අපි එසේ හොඳින් තොරතුරු අනාවරණය කරපු ආයතන ට්‍රැක් වාර්තාව හරහා ඇගීමට ලක් කරලා යම්කිසි පිළිගැනීමට ලක් කරලා ප්‍රසිද්ධියට පත් කරන්නේ. මේ ක්‍රියාදාමයේදී අපි මේ ආයතනවලට අපි තොරතුරු ලබා දෙනවා. අපි මේ ට්‍රැක් වාර්තාව කරනවා. ඔබ ආයතනයේ ලබා තියෙන ලකුණු මට්ටම මෙහෙමයි. මේකට හේතු සාධක මෙහෙමයි. ඔබට ලකුණු මට්ටම එන වසරේදී වැඩි කරගන්න අවශ්‍ය නම් ඔබ කොහොමද ඔබේ විනිවිදභාවය වැඩි කරගන්න පුළුවන්? මේ සියලුම නිර්දේශ අපි මේ ආයතන වලට ලබා දෙන අතර මේ වාර්තාවෙන් ඔබට බලා ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඊට අමතරව අපි රජයට සහ රජයට මේ නීති රෙගුලාසි සම්බන්ධයෙන් සිද්ධ විය යුතු වැදගත් වෙනස්කම් සම්බන්ධයෙන් උත් නිර්දේශ ලබා දී තියෙනවා. මං හිතන්නේ ඊට අමතරව මේ එක ආයතනයේ ලකුණු මට්ටම සහ මේ සවිස්තරාත්මක තොරතුරු ලබා දැනගන්න කැමති නම් අපේ වෙබ් අඩවිය හරහා සියලුම මේ වාර්තාවත් ඔබට ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඊට අමතරව අර ලකුණු මට්ටම් සියලු දේ බලන්න පුළුවන් වෙනවා. ඉතින් මම මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා මේ අවුරුද්දේ සමාගම් වාර්තාකරණයේ විනිවිදභාවය පිළිබඳ ඇගීමේට සම්බන්ධ වෙච්ච මේ ආයතන 75 විශේෂයෙන්ම අපිට ප්‍රතිචාර දක්වමින් අපි තම ආයතනවල විනිවිදභාවය වැඩි කරගත යුත්තේ කෙසේද කියලා උනන්දුවක් දැක්වූ ඒ ආයතන සම්බන්ධයෙන් මම සුබ පතනවා. ඒ වගේම මම ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා මේ අපේ රටේ පෞද්ගලික අංශය සහ විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ ඉදිරි පෙළේ සිට මේ ආයතන මේ අපේ රටේ දූෂණය පිටු දැකීමේ මේ කාර්යයට අපි යන මේ ගමනට දායක වෙයි කියලා ඔවුන්ගේ පැත්තෙන් හොඳ ආයතන පුරවැසියන් වෙයි කියලා. මොකද මේ ගමන ඉදිරියට කරගන්න අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම අපිට පෞද්ගලික අංශයේ දායකත්වය අවශ්‍ය වෙන. ඒ වගේම අපි ජනතාවගෙන් ඉල්ලා සිටින්නේ ඔබ පෞද්ගලික අංශයෙන් උත් මේ වගේ විනිවිදභාවයක් ඉල්ලා සිටින්න කියලා. බොහොම ස්තුතියි.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். நான் பிரியா பால்ராஜ், டிரான்ஸ்பெரன்சி இன்டர்நேஷனல் நிறுவனத்தில் சிரேஷ்ட நிகழ்ச்சி திட்ட உத்தியோகத்தராக கடமையாற்றிக் கொண்டிருக்கிறேன். இன்று அதாவது 2021ஆம் ஆண்டிற்கான வர்த்தக நிறுவனங்களின் அறிக்கையிடலில் வெளிப்படைத்தன்மை தொடர்பான ட்ராக் அறிக்கையினை வெளியிட்டு வைக்கின்றோம். அந்த நிகழ்வு இன்று வெளியிட்டு வைக்கப்படும் நிகழ்வு இன்று நடத்தப்படுகின்றது. இந்த அறிக்கையானது நாம் 2வது தடவையாக இங்கு வெளியிட்டு வைக்கின்றோம். கடந்த வருடத்தில் அதாவது 2020ஆம் ஆண்டு இந்த ட்ராக் அறிக்கையானது வெளியிட்டு வைக்கப்பட்டிருந்தது. தற்போது இந்த ஆய்வு அறிக்கையில் இந்த நிறுவனங்கள் அதாவது வரையறுக்கப்பட்ட நிறுவனங்கள் கிட்டத்தட்ட மத்தியமமான நிலையினை வெளிப்படுத்தி இருக்கின்றன என்பது இந்த ஆய்வின் மூலம் வெளிப்படுத்தப்படுகின்றது. கடந்த வருடத்துடன் ஒப்பிடும் போது, குறிப்பாக இந்த முதலாவது அறிக்கையுடன் ஒப்பிடும் போது 6.73 புள்ளிகளில் இருந்து தற்போது 6.93 புள்ளிகளை ஓரளவு அதிகமாக பெற்று மத்தியமமான நிலையை அடைந்திருப்பது இந்த ஆய்வுக்கூடாக அறியப்பட்டிருக்கின்றது. அதே நேரத்தில் இந்த புள்ளிகளானது 0 தொடக்கம் 10 வரையான புள்ளிகள் வழங்கப்படுகின்ற அதேவேளை 0 புள்ளிகள் என்பது குறைவான, அதாவது அறிக்கையிடலில் வெளிப்படைத்தன்மையில் குறைவான வெளிப்படைத்தன்மையை வெளிப்படுத்தி இருப்பதுடன் 10 புள்ளிகள் என்பது அறிக்கையிடலில் வெளிப்படைத்தன்மையில் அதிகமாக வெளிப்படைத்தன்மையை வெளிப்படுத்தி இருக்கின்றன என்பதையும் இங்கு குறிப்பிட்டு கூற முடியும். அதே நேரத்தில் இந்த ஆய்வுக்காக கிட்டத்தட்ட 75, அதாவது 2021ஆம் ஆண்டு ஜூன் மாதம் கொழும்பு பங்குச்சந்தையில் சிறந்த முதல் நிறுவனங்கள் 75 நிறுவனங்கள் இந்த ஆய்வுக்காக உட்படுத்தப்பட்டிருக்கின்றன. கடந்த வருடத்துடன் ஒப்பிடும் போது இந்த கம்பெனிகள் கடந்த வருடம் 50 கம்பெனிகள் இந்த ஆய்வுக்காக உட்படுத்தப்பட்டிருந்ததோடு இந்த வருடம் 75 கம்பெனிகளாக அது அதிகரிக்கப்பட்டிருக்கின்றது என்பதும் குறிப்பிடத்தக்கது. இந்த ஆய்வு அறிக்கையானது 3 பிரதான முக்கிய விடயங்களை உள்ளடக்கி ஆய்வுக்கு உட்படுத்தப்பட்டிருக்கின்றது. குறிப்பாக இந்த நிறுவனங்களில் ஊழலுக்கு எதிரான நடவடிக்கைகள் தொடர்பான தகவல்கள் வெளியிடப்பட்டிருப்பது தொடர்பாகவும், அதே நேரத்தில் தமது கம்பெனிகள் தொடர்பான நிதியியல் நடவடிக்கைகள், நிதிசார் அறிக்கைகள் போன்ற விடயங்கள் எந்தளவு தூரம் பொது வெளியில் பொதுமக்களின் பார்வைக்காக தமது இணையதளங்களில் ஆண்டறிக்கைகளினூடாக அல்லது நிதி அறிக்கைகளின் ஊடாக வெளியிடப்பட்டிருக்கின்றன என்பதற்கூடாகவும் இந்த தகவல்கள் மதிப்பாய்வு செய்யப்பட்டிருக்கின்றன. அதே நேரத்தில் உள்ளக நடவடிக்கைகள், கம்பெனி உரிமையாளர்கள், பங்குதாரர்கள் அவர்கள் பெற்றுக்கொள்கின்ற வரி, வருமானம் போன்ற விடயங்கள் உள்ளடக்கியதாக இந்த ஆய்வு அறிக்கை ஆய்வுக்குட்படுத்தப்பட்டிருக்கின்றது. அதே நேரத்தில் இந்த ஆய்வின் முக்கிய தரப்படுத்தலில் அதிக புள்ளிகளை பெற்று கடந்த வருடத்தோடு ஒப்பிடும்போது அதிக புள்ளிகளை பெற்று ஜான் ஸ்கீல்ஸ் கூட்டு நிறுவனத்தினர் 1ஆம் இடத்தை பெற்றுக்கொண்டுள்ள அதே நேரம் கொமர்ஷியல் வங்கி 2ஆம் இடத்தையும், அதே நேரம் டயலாக் ஆசியாட்டா நிறுவனமும் முதல் 3 இடங்களையும் பெற்று தரப்படுத்தப்பட்டிருக்கின்றன. உண்மையில் இந்த நிறுவனங்கள் அனைவருக்கும், அதாவது எமது இந்த ஆய்வுக்கு தங்களது பங்களிப்பை வழங்கிய அனைத்து நிறுவனங்களுக்கும் நாம் நன்றி கூற கடமைப்பட்டிருக்கின்றோம். அவர்கள் தங்களது அதாவது நிதியியல், அதாவது அறிக்கையிடல் வெளிப்படுத்தலில் தமது வெளிப்படைத்தன்மையை எவ்வாறு மேம்படுத்திக் கொள்வது, அதே நேரம் ஊழலுக்கு எதிரான நடவடிக்கைகள், தமது தகவல்களை வெளிப்படுத்துவது தொடர்பாக எவ்வாறு மேலதிகமாக தம்மை மேம்படுத்தி கொள்ள முடியும் என்பது தொடர்பான மேலதிக விவரங்களையும் இந்த ஆய்வுக்கூடாக தாங்கள் பெற்றுக்கொண்டு எங்களோடு கலந்து ஆலோசித்து ஆலோசனைகளையும் பெற்றுக்கொண்டார்கள். அதே நேரத்தில் ஏனைய விடயங்கள், அதாவது குறிப்பாக இந்த மதிப்பாய்வானது தங்களது குறைவான புள்ளிகளை பெற்றுக்கொண்ட நிறுவனங்கள் தங்களது இந்த வெளிப்படைத்தன்மை தொடர்பான, அதாவது நிறுவனங்கள் தங்களது வெளிப்படைத்தன்மையினை தகவல்களை வெளிப்படுத்தும் வெளிப்படைத்தன்மை தொடர்பான அறிக்கையிடலில் குறைவான புள்ளிகளை பெற்றுக்கொண்ட நிறுவனங்கள் எந்த விதத்திலும் குறைந்தவர்கள் அல்ல. அதாவது நாம் இந்த ஆய்வில் முக்கியமாக கருத்தில் கொண்ட விடயம் அவர்களது தகவல்களை வெளிப்படுத்துதல் தொடர்பான விடயமாகும். இதற்காக அதிக புள்ளிகளை பெற்றுக்கொண்டவர்கள் தங்களது நிறுவனத்தில் எந்த விதமான நடைமுறைகளும், அதாவது ஊழல் தொடர்பான நடைமுறைகளும் இதில் நாங்கள் கருத்தில் கொள்ளவில்லை என்பது குறிப்பிடத்தக்க ஒரு முக்கியமான விடயம். அதே நேரத்தில் இந்த ஆய்வு தொடர்பான மேலதிக விவரங்கள், அதாவது ஒவ்வொரு நிறுவனமும் பெற்றுக்கொண்ட புள்ளி விவரங்கள், அது தொடர்பான ஆலோசனைகள், பரிந்துரைகள் தொடர்பான விவரங்களை பார்வையிடுவதற்கு அவசியமாகும் போது எமது இணையதளமான www.tisrilanka.org என்ற இணையதளத்தினூடாக மேலதிக விவரங்களை நீங்கள் பார்வையிட்டு கொள்ளலாம். அதே நேரத்தில் தனியார் துறை என்பது அரச ஊழலுக்கு உந்து சக்தியாக அல்லது ஊழலை ஊக்குவிக்கின்ற ஒரு துறையாக காணப்படுகின்றது. அந்த வகையில் இந்த ஆய்வானது குறிப்பாக ஒரு ஆரம்ப கட்டமாக நாம் இதை முன்னெடுத்து செல்வதற்கான காரணம், ஒவ்வொரு நிறுவனங்களும் தமது தகவல்களை தாம் செயற்படுத்துகின்ற நிதியியல் தொடர்பான தகவல்கள், தமது ஏனைய நடவடிக்கைகள் தொடர்பான உள்ளக நடவடிக்கைகள் தொடர்பான தகவல்கள், பங்குதாரர்கள் தொடர்பான உரிமம் தொடர்பான தகவல்கள், இவை போன்ற தகவல்களை பொதுமக்களின் பார்வைக்காக பொது வழியில் இலகுவாக பெற்றுக்கொள்ளக்கூடிய வகையில் வெளிப்படைத்தன்மையினூடாக எமது ஊழலுக்கான ஒரு படியினை நாமல் குறைத்து கொள்ளக்கூடியதாக இருக்கும். அந்த அடிப்படையில் தான் இந்த ஆய்வானது முதற்கட்டமாக மேற்கொள்ளப்பட்டுள்ளது என்பதையும் நாங்கள் தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கிறோம். இந்த வகையில் எதிர்காலத்தில் ஏனைய நிறுவனங்களும், இந்த 75 நிறுவனங்கள் உட்பட ஏனைய நிறுவனங்களும் எங்களோடு இணைந்து இந்த ஊழலுக்கு எதிரான நடவடிக்கைகளில் எம்மோடு கைகோர்த்து ஒன்றிணைய வேண்டும் எனவும் நாங்கள் வேண்டுகோள் விடுக்கின்றோம். நன்றி.